everyone. Once again, I apologize for the delay in the starting of this program. And once again, welcome to the Regional Stakeholders Engagement on Strengthening Fiscal Sustainability and Climate Action Through Open Budget. So first off, we would be standing up to take the national anthem as we commence this program.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribes and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians all are proud to serve our sovereign motherland. Our flag shall be a symbol that truth and justice reign. In peace, oh, back to honor it, and this we count as gain. To hand unto our children a banner without stain. O God of all creation, grant these our one request. Help us to build a nation where no man is oppressed, and so with peace and plenty, Nigeria may be blessed.
Let's have our seats. So we'll be moving on to the welcome remarks, and I would welcome Alice Adedayo to take us through the welcome remarks for today.
Thank you. Inakwana, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the workshop on Regional Stakeholders Engagement on Strengthening Fiscal Sustainability and Climate Action Through Open Budgeting. So this event is organized by Budget in conjunction with PACE, which is the Partnership for Agile Governance and Climate Engagement. So what we are trying to see is, what we're trying to do is to see how we can mainstream climate finance in our public finance management system here in Nigeria. So I believe all of us have the agenda. So we'll be having two presentations from Budget, followed by a presentation from PACE itself. Please, would like you to contribute as much as you can, because we are all CSOs in this space. We are all professionals. So we need your contributions for input, because the output of this workshop will be a communique that will be published out there by Budget and the rest of you, because you are representing your organization and the CSOs in the KKJ states at large. So thank you very much, everyone, once again for coming, and have a great day today. Bye.
Okay. Thank you, Alice. Next up, we'll be doing a short introduction of ourselves. So I'll be passing the mic. You just give us your name, the organization, and your designation. So I'll start. My name is Oluwatimileni Olugbemi. I am a program officer at Budget. I am currently going to be handling the agenda of today. So I'll be passing the mic to the next person beside.
I don't know your name. Huh?
Okay, you can just go first.
Good morning, everyone. I am Caroline Aninta, Program Officer at Budget Foundation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, once again. My name is Ali Sadidayo. I work with Budget Foundation.
Good morning. I am Aiba Muhammad, Program Officer, Exceptional Leadership and Integrity Promotion Initiative, a civil society organization working on public financial management.
Sir, what state are you from?
From Jigawa State.
Good morning, I'm Isa Mustafa from Jigawa State, a civil society organization working on PFM.
Working on?
PFM.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ahmed Abubakar. I'm from Jigawa as well. I work with Turn Up Jigawa, a youth-led civic engagement initiative which focuses on improving good governance and accountability.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amina Lom Marafa, Program Officer at Amino Magashigarba Foundation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Uma Kulsum. I work for Pace Kano.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hayuba Isiaku in Jeddah. I'm a partnership facilitator with the PACE program in Kano.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Umi Adamu. I work with US Anchor Foundation, Kano.
Good morning. My name is Hadiza Abdullah Kishimi from OG.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mansur Umar Kurugu. I am a communication for development specialist, and I work with Elevators for Development. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Halima Abdelkader Idris from the Department of Environmental Management, Bayero University, Kano.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Murtala Uba Muhammad from the Department of Geography, Bayero University, Kano.
Good morning, everybody. Dr. Savit Saadida, Bara University, Kano, also a technical advisor to Honorable Commissioner, Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Levan Umar from Asken Kano platform.
Good morning, Talha is my name from Usanka Foundation.
Thank you. My name is Akib President and Development Center. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Adamu Suleiman. State Team Lead Connected Development, Jigawa.
Morning, everyone. My name is Shuaib Musaka Fingana from Jigawa Partnership for Climate Action, Economic Empowerment and Responsible Governance. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yusuf Muhammad Uthman from Bridge Nigeria Initiative.
Good morning, all. Assalamu alaikum. I am Riel Osman from Coalition of Kano Climate Action Partners.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aitohoi Glory. I work with Budget Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and it is nice to meet. Up next, we'll be having the first presentation for today, which would be on fiscal sustainability, and that will be taken by Caroline Anita. So I'll hand over to her.
Mic here. Good morning, everyone. I already introduced myself, but in case no one or some people did not hear me, I am Caroline Anita, and I work with the Open Government and Institutional Partnership Department at Budget Foundation. And today I'm going to be giving a presentation on fiscal sustainability and stakeholder action for climate finance. So before I move right into the presentation, I just want to state that climate finance isn't just a line item in the budget, it's a shared responsibility. How we manage resources, engage stakeholders, and hold systems accountable will determine whether our communities thrive or simply survive. That's why fiscal sustainability matters and why we all have a role to play. Please, let's move to the next slide. Thank you. So before we begin, I'd like to talk about civil society grant perspective. This just simply states where we stand as civil society organizations, where we talk about the big picture and what the civil society is here to do. So basically, civil society sits between the government and the people, making sense of, so we just simplify information for citizens, we make sense of complex systems so that citizens do not just react to the government, but also make informed decisions and demand accountability as well. So basically, we break down things, whether it is the economy or public decision, making it clear into relatable information. And in doing this, we don't just focus on the now, we draw from the past, we analyze what's happening in the present, and use that to make thoughtful projections about our future. Next slide, please. So we're moving on to the problem statement. Before we even get into climate finance, there's a broader structural issue we need to understand. What we're seeing here is a consistent increase in Nigeria's federal budget. So over the past few years, from about 22.88 trillion in 2023, the federal budget has doubled, in fact, it has more than doubled to a proposed 58.47 trillion in 2026. But the key issue here is that the growth in budget size hasn't transformed into a notable increase in the improvement of citizens' lives. And there's a clear disconnect between how much is being spent and the actual impact on the ground. At the same time, the budget deficit, so the budget deficit is also rising quite sharply from 9.17 trillion in 2024 to a proposed 24 trillion in 2026. And what that signals is actually an increasing reliance on borrowing, which raises concerns about debt sustainability over time. Interestingly, the medium-term expenditure framework is also making commitments around sustainability, talking about integrating green initiatives, renewable energy, and climate-conscious planning for the 2026 budget. So while these intentions are actually very important, the real question is how well will these commitments be implemented, and will they translate into tangible outcomes for citizens? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. Third slide, please. So now, this is where the issue becomes even more pronounced. When we look at, oh, thank you very much. Down, okay. Okay, okay, perfect. Okay, so this is where the issue even becomes more pronounced, like I said, because we'll look at climate finance specifically. Even though climate finance, both internationally and domestically, is growing, state governments still struggle to actually access the use of funds effectively. And this is largely due to structural issues. Yes, this is due to structural issues, weak public financial management systems, and fragmented governance. Yes, I'm sorry. So for context, Nigeria attracted about 2.5 billion in climate finance around 2021 to 2022. But when you place that against the estimated annual need of 17.7 billion, the shortfall is significant. And that gap is not just a funding issue, it's a development issue. Because if climate isn't properly integrated into broader economic agenda, it becomes difficult to achieve key national priorities, including SDGs and the country's 2030 vision for shared prosperity. So, understanding climate, sorry, hold on. Okay, yes. So, understanding climate finance, we need to shift how we actually think about climate finance, because it is not just an environmental issue, it's fundamentally a social justice issue, because at its core, climate finance raises important questions about who bears the risk. We already see that certain groups, especially vulnerable and low-income communities, are disproportionately affected by climate impact. It also forces us to ask who is paying for adaptation, and in many cases, the burden ultimately falls on citizens. People who are already navigating an economy that on paper looks like it's improving, but in reality hasn't turned into the better living conditions of citizens. There's also an issue of inclusion, because our budgeting process, both at the federal and at the state level, often does not adequately protect or prioritize the poor. Many of the most affected groups are simply not carried along in decision-making processes. So basically, let's say, border community as an example, and the issues they face. Let's say they face a climate issue, but our leaders cannot sit at the Aso Villa and decide, oh, this is how these people will be affected by a certain problem, if they are not part of the budgeting process to give, let's say, their own perspective, their experience. That will help make informed decisions. So it's better to carry them along, because they are the best people to prefer solutions to their problems, because they know where it hurts the most. Moving on. So there's also transparency issue as well, particularly around disaster-related spending. If climate finance is actually going to be meaningful, then then how those funds are allocated and spent must be clear, open, and accountable. So, understanding climate change. According to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change refers to the long-term shifts and alterations in weather patterns and global temperatures that can be attributed to human activities and the overall environment. Health, agriculture, food security, water resources, energy. It is a pressing global issue that has far-reaching implications for the planet and its inhabitants. So adaptation basically is to MDAs before they prepare their budgets. It sets policy priorities, spending ceilings, templates, and reporting requirements. So for us to have engagements at the federal level, our best bet is to engage the budget office before the issued. Then we can advocate for climate budget tagging requirements, climate-sensitive expenditures, then requirement for climate risk assessments in capital project proposals and integration of nationally determined contributions into sector ceilings. At the subnational level, we can engage state ministries of budget and planning, and we can advocate for climate screening requirements. See the slides. We're going to share these presentations with you at the end of today's workshop. And please, if you have any, we welcome more contributions than questions, because we're here to get your opinion on these things as well. So we have a plenary session coming up actually so you can save your contributions for then. Like when we're done with the presentations, just take down notes so you don't forget what you might want to ask or contribute. Thank you. Okay, so we have the MTEF. I'm sure we're all familiar with MTEF in this room. So that's a 3-year rolling fiscal framework that sets revenue projections, deficit levels, debt plans, and aggregate spending ceilings. Climate adaptation is capital intensive and long term. If it is not reflected in the 3-year fiscal space, it will remain ad hoc. So we believe that climate adaptation should be part of the MTEF, because that's a 3-year planning by the government, and why isn't climate adaptation part of it? And that's a very big issue, because it will affect the economy of the country as well. Then at the federal level, we can engage in budget Ministry of Finance, Budget Office, Debt Management Office, Central Bank, National Assembly committees in the House of Representatives and the Senate. So these committees are don't worry, I'll take it back myself. It's okay. So the National Assembly committees in the House of Representatives and Senate. So committees on environment, finance, appropriations, and climate change. This is an influence map that has, sorry, give me a minute, please. Okay. Okay, so in this influence map, we've categorized MDAs into those with more authority, less authority, the ones with strategic relevance and implementation relevance. And we've also categorized them into MDAs that will give information and the ones that gather information, the ones that CSOs can probably have a dialogue with, and the ones we can consult, that's consultation. So under the information giving, we have the Ministry of Finance, the DG Budget Office, DG Debt Management Office, the Chair Senate Committee on Appropriations, Chair House Committee on Climate Change, and National Council on Climate Change. Then for dialogue, we have the National Assembly Technical Staff, Ministry of Environment Directors, Budget Office Technical Teams, DMO Sustainability Unit, and Governors Forum Policy Unit. Then for information gathering, we have NBS, that's the National Bureau of Statistics. We all know that most information we want, especially on fiscal data as well, can be gotten from the NBS. Then you have the Hydrological Services Agency, Meteorological Agency, Ecological Fund Office, communities affected by flooding and desertification contractors, executing climate projects. And then for the consultation, we have the state ministries of environment, state budget offices, local governments in flood-prone areas, agricultural extension agencies, water basin authorities, NEMA, and state emergency agencies. So the key structural weaknesses in the PFM system. So the first one is there is no comprehensive climate budget tagging. So Nigeria does not yet have a transparent, unified system to track climate-related spending across MDAs. Without tagging, allocations can't be monitored or evaluated, making accountability nearly impossible. So if you check the budget of some states, you can actually see some line items that are climate-related. But let's say, okay, when I do budget analysis, for instance, and I'm trying to work on something that has to do with the state's House of Assembly, and I just check, they always have a code. So if you use the Control-Find, like Control-F on your computer or what you're using, you will see everything that has that code. And when it pops up, it's all under the State House of Assembly. But for climate financing and all, there's no central tag that you can use to find every allocation climate financing. So that's one problem that the government needs to address. Then another one is the weak tracking of ecological fund. So out of 4.18% of special funds, only 1% goes to ecological fund. The 2026 appropriation bill proposes 1.63 trillion for special funds, but it is not even clear how to track these funds. There's no way to track it. And then another structural weakness in the PFM system is the low capital execution rates. Climate adaptation projects are capital intensive. Often, only 30 to 40% of allocated funds are released and used, meaning that most projects fail to reach citizens or deliver expected benefits. So the question is, what do we need to do to boost this? The next one is the fragmented donor integration. So climate finance from donors is often parallel and off budget and poorly coordinated. So most times when climate finance, like there's funding for climate change or issues like this, it's usually not recorded in the budget. So there's no way of tracking it because it is not a line item in the budget. So the funds are just used however the government pleases to use it. So this actually makes long-term planning difficult and reduces efficiency because those funds cannot be tracked as they are off budget. And the big question is, what kind of approach is needed to bring them under one roof, if possible? The next one is debt finance climate spending. So borrowing is frequently used to fund adaptation projects in Nigeria, but without careful design, these projects may not be fiscally sustainable and can crowd out other social spending. So we can also ask ourselves the extent to which we will face the implications of fiscal, of not having a sustainable climate finance. So the takeaway from this is that these weaknesses mean that climate finance risks remaining on paper without actually delivering real impact. Stronger tracking, integration, and execution are needed to make adaptation more effective. Sorry. Nope. So these are potential advocacy approaches for CSOs. And I believe we're all civil society organizations in the room. So these are some entry points for you, some advocacy approaches you might want to adopt. So the first one is climate budget shadow reports. Civil society can produce annual climate budget credibility assessments, climate allocation and execution tracker. We can track climate tagged capital projects to site level, push for adoption of functional classification at the state and federal levels for climate-focused capital expenditures, joint climate budget hearings, so we can show up coordinated during National Assembly budget defense season. Then we have the climate risk fiscal briefs, link flood risk to fiscal losses and debt pressures, subnational climate fiscal ranking. Thus, we can compare states on ecological fund. Okay, no, sorry. So we can just do a comparison of states on climate fiscal ranking, pardon me. Then the last one is ecological fund transparency. So we can engage the Ecological Project Office via the Secretary to the Government of the Federation on disbursements. Sorry. So final thoughts. Nigeria's fiscal sustainability is already under pressure from debt, oil volatility, and social spending needs. So climate shocks are not future risk, but present, and they are fiscal and environmental shocks. If we do not integrate climate into fiscal planning now, we will borrow to repair damage, crowd out social spending, and end up deepening poverty. Climate finance is not an environmental activism, but macroeconomic stability and an appreciation of the world itself. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. So, moderator.
Thank you, Caroline, for the presentation on fiscal sustainability. As CSOs, I believe that conversations around climate change and climate finance in Nigeria should be a daily conversation. It should not happen only when we find ourselves in rooms like this because it affects our daily lives. So up next, I will be inviting Alice Adedayo. She would be giving a presentation on strengthening public finance management systems to unlock climate finance in Nigeria. Please, let's put our hands together.
Inawininku. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Inakwana. Good afternoon, everybody, once again. Good morning. So, for emphasis, these presentations are majorly to set the pace for the conversation amongst us today. So after this presentation, we'll be taking your inputs, which will be the final output, which is a communique, right? So please, we'll implore you to please pay attention. This is majorly to set the pace. Pay attention, and please we welcome your contribution. So from my end, I'll be talking. So thank you very much to my colleague once again for that presentation. So from my end, I'll be talking on green accountability and climate budgeting. Although my colleague has touched based on that, but I'll just for emphasis sake and for the sake of the conversation we'll be having in this room today, I'll be touching points on that. So for context, like my colleague mentioned, climate change is basically as a result of increased earth temperature as a result of our activities from cutting down of trees. I was raised and born in northern Nigeria. So I see a lot of rural communities cut down trees, which are very detrimental to our environment. In Niger Delta region, for example, you see the activities of oil and gas companies, which actually releases methane, which is CH4 into the atmosphere, and increasingly increases the Earth's temperature, which is why we have climate change. And for context also, to lead this conversation, we have different climate actions. My colleagues has mentioned mitigation, adaptation. We also have climate action like climate education as well, and climate education and also R&D. A lot is not really going into research and development. So these are all climate action that we as CSOs should fully engage in as well. So we'll be talking. So for mitigation, for example, we've seen for some of us that engage with the government, we've seen a lot of funds through the Rural Education Agency, for example, the World Bank, the African Development Bank. There's a recent fund from the World Bank, which is about 750 million USD. The African Development Bank disbursed over 200 million USD. So how do we track this fund? Because most of these funds are coming in. Then we also have the ecological fund through the SSGF office. So how do we have the entry points for advocacy as CSOs? Because we can't just watch all of these funds come in and we are unable to account for them. So I'll be touching on green accountability. So next slide, please. So green accountability is simply embedding climate-specific oversight, transparency reporting, and audit mechanism throughout the public financial management system. So climate funds should be spent for their designation, mitigation, or adaptation purposes. For example, for mitigation projects, you could have, like all of us, even this hotel, we have a lot of people installing solar panels on their roofs. These are mitigation projects. We have tree planting, they are mitigation projects. And for adaptation, for example, flood control, in agricultural sector, for example, areas that are prone to flooding. For example, there's a community in Kogi State called Ibaji. They are very prone to flooding. So at the end of the farming season, for example, they cultivate rice. They are basically rice rural smallholder farmers, and rice takes about 3 or 4 months for cultivation. And one of the problems they're having is that if they are unable to cultivate and harvest within that period, they might lose their crops. So one of the things why they're able to, on how they're able to build resilience is by using climate smart seeds, which has actually helped them in adaptation. Also, like irrigation, for example, using solar-powered irrigation system, it can also be cross-cutting. There's either climate adaptation or mitigation. So for example, we need this public financial management system to ensure that these outcomes are measurable and verifiable. Linkages and diversion and inefficiencies are minimized. Citizens and international partners can actually track this performance. Like, for example, we said the Ecological Fund is situated within the SSGF office. We also have funds from other multilateral donors. So how do we ensure that these partners are able to track? So it is our jobs as CSO to ensure that this is done. Also, climate accountability necessitates that climate finance operates within transparency, participation, equity, and efficacy. This helps ensure that allocated funds are spent according to what they are designed for and encourages the involvement of all stakeholders in promoting sustainable future. For example, one of the things we do at Budget, what we are actually known for at Budget is transparency and accountability. We track some of these projects. So how do we now mainstream climate action into transparency? So given the critical importance of finance to combating climate change and facilitating the global energy transition, it is very critical to ensure that allocated funds are used for their intended purpose. So why accountability? Why do we need to be accountable? One of the reasons is to ensure that climate funds are not diverted. For example, how do we ensure that the 750 million that was disbursed to the Rural Education Agency, for example, is not diverted by developers, for example? Project delivers measurable adaptation or mitigation results. There is environmental and social safeguards. Procurement systems are transparent. Financial reporting meets international standards, and weak accounting system significantly reduces a country's eligibility for direct financing. If we do not have this accountability system in place, it will be very difficult for us to attract more funds into the countries, which is very critical for our economic security as a country. So next, I'll also be moving to climate budgeting. So climate budgeting is simply a governance system that mainstreams climate commitments and consideration into decision-making on policies, actions, and budgets. So for example, we were analyzing climate budgets for 3 subnationals. And there were 2 key things that we discovered when we were doing the analysis. One, there's what we call the NCOA, that's the National Chartered of Accounts. Those codes should, for example, for environment, the code is 2304 for environmental projects. So it would be great for us to see mainstreaming of this code in the budget system to promote climate budgeting. Another key thing that we noticed is, for example, when we did the analysis for Delta states, the budgets allocated to climate, which includes mitigation, adaptation, climate education, R&D, were way below 5%. So you can see that we have our role to play in advocating for this key point to ensure that national and subnational, through the climate action plan, integrate climate targets, and also there's also a key thing, aside mainstreaming climate into budgeting, there's also a need for monitoring and evaluation, which is very critical, which we talked about when we were talking about green accountability. So these are some of the pillars of climate budgeting. We have mainstreaming for environmental sustainability, resource allocation for environmental sustainability, planning and coordination for environmental sustainability, evaluation and monitoring for environmental sustainability, which is very, very critical, especially if we need to attract more finance targeted at climate. And also we have transparency and accountability for environmental sustainability, and also policy signals for greening initiative, and which is one of the things that the NCCC is also doing. One of the things they are doing is to harmonize some of these climate change policies. So what are the entry points? Because for us as CSOs, we need to have an entry point. So for example, the national and subnational budget remains the primary entry point for mobilizing, coordinating, and tracking climate finance. So, so I've mentioned green accountability, I've mentioned climate governance, climate budgeting. So what are the key observations and challenges of climate budgeting in Nigeria, which my colleague also touched based on during our presentation? So for example, the current climate finance inflows are inadequate. An estimated amount of 17.7 billion change. Also, I was reading something online, and I was privileged. The country also needs about $20 billion. Climate finance remains constrained. Another key observation and challenges of climate budgeting is the weak alignment between climate objectives and planning instruments. My colleague mentioned that earlier. So there's a need to mainstream it into the medium-term planning instrument, particularly the MTEF and the MTSS. And also there's a need for a strong alignment between climate objective and these instruments. Another gap is also around public finance. There's a PFM further constrained climate finance readiness. There's a weak cash management, procurement inefficiencies, limited debt management capacity, and gaps in financial reporting reduces confidence amongst climate finance providers and development partners. So one of the things I would like us to discuss this morning, because you realize that most of this funding coming into the countries are large concessional funds, which are mostly debts. So how do we ensure that in addressing climate change, we are not incurring additional debts for the country? So how do we ensure we address that? So this is one critical area of funding I mentioned earlier, like the 750 million USD from the World Bank, the $200 million from African Development Bank. All this money have to be paid back. They are not free money. So how do we ensure that we don't incur more debts as a country? So these are some of the indicators, the current situations, and the implications of some of these observations and challenges. For example, I did mention that we did an analysis of the budget. So climate budget share currently is between 3.5% of total allocation, which implies that there is an inadequate investment relative to adaptation and mitigation needs. Also, debt servicing to revenue ratio. For example, in 2025, it was 34% and projected to be between 45% and 53% of the revenue, which implies that it crowds out climate and development spending. So this is one critical area that it would be very important for us in this room to discuss. Also, we can see the case of currency and inflation, which is very high, which erodes the real value of climate allocation. We also have institutional readiness, which is slow progress, no climate tagging, dormant climate change fund, weak tracking. And also we have an indicator, which is the economic growth linkage, which is weak. Climate spending is not leveraged for jobs or resilience. And then we have, for the performance metrics, we have average capital execution rates at the moment at the federal level is between 40 to 60%. In Kaduna State, it was 50% in 2024. Jigawa State was 50 to 70%. In Kano, 30 to 50%. And of course, we have the last column, which is the best practice. So from this best practice, you can see that both at the federal levels and these states we used as a case study, just Jigawa was able to meet the best practice benchmark. We also have the climate budget execution, 45 to 65% at the federal level. Then Kaduna has implemented the formal tagging system. Jigawa, we have between 1 to 99%, which is very volatile. We have Kano State, 3 to 27%. Climate investments at the federal level, we have 3 to 6% of total budgets at the federal level. In Kaduna last year, climate investment intensity was around 16.72%. Jigawa between 7 to 15%. In Kano State, 6 to 15%. Jigawa still made the list. So we have, for transparency and reporting, at the federal level, it was low. Kaduna State's high. They have explicit climate tags and open data. Jigawa is still medium. Kano is low, but it should be high, which are best practice. We have the MTEF at the federal level is weak. Kaduna State is strong. Jigawa moderate, and Kano weak, and and for the institutional public finance management at the federal level, there's minimal progress. Kaduna State, we've seen advanced climate tagging. Jigawa is still coming up. Kano is also still coming up. So these are some of the key advocacy points for CSOs to engage with both the federal level and the subnationals, especially for our focus state, which is Kano, Jigawa, and Kaduna. So there's a need to embed climate action into our MTEF. There's medium and long-term planning. There's also need to strengthen climate responsive public financial management system. There's a need to develop bankable climate project pipelines. And also, there's also a tool by PACE, that's the Partnership for Agile Governance and Climate Engagement through the FCDO. They have developed a climate finance toolkit, which they'll also be presenting shortly after this presentation. So they'll train us on how climate finance can be accessed to promote further eco-friendly businesses understand climate finance better, and also for us to be able to identify available funding sources, learn the requirements, because it's not enough to know some of these sources. We need to know the requirements and how to meet those requirements and rightly position ourselves as a country. Because for us as CSOs, we're in partnership with the governments and the citizens. So we need to work with the governments and the citizens and also other CSOs to position ourselves as a nation to adequately access climate finance. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Alice, for your presentation on strengthening PFM systems to unlock climate finance in Nigeria. I think one important thing I took out of her presentation was the question she asked on how we ensure in addressing climate change we do not incur more debt. And I know we said we should keep our contributions for the plenary session. So please, let's consider that question because it's quite important. How do we ensure in addressing climate change we do not incur more debt? So up next, I'll be inviting Madam Habiba. She'll be taking us through the presentation on the Climate Finance Toolkit. So please put the video up for her shortly. Madam Habiba, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm the one controlling the slide.
So I'll be introducing the video, presenting the toolkit. Well, like the previous presentations have highlighted, there are various sources of climate finance, and what the PACE toolkit does is to help us easily identify
the one controlling the
those
slide
sources, their requirements,
Yes,
and
I'm sharing.
also present us with assessment tools for us to be able to assess either the
Good morning,
state
everyone.
or
My
eco-friendly
name is
businesses
Basil
and or
Obase,
eco-friendly
and I am the Public
businesses
Financial
to see
Management
their
Advisor
position,
for the PACE program.
how well are they positioned to
In this
access
presentation, we'll
these
be looking at the
various
guide to
sources of
assessing
finance,
climate
and then
finance
taking it a
developed
step
by
further
PACE.
to
PACE is the Partnership for Agile Governance
tease out what you're
and Climate
expected to do,
Engagement funded
what you
by
need
the
to do to
FCDO.
also improve your
The next
chances
slide.
of accessing any of this finance.
In this slide,
And
we'll be looking
from
at
the presentation, you'd have
understanding
seen
climate
one of
change.
the
What
domestic
is
sources of
climate change?
finance, which is
According to the
budget.
United Nations
The
Framework
state
Convention
budget
on
is
Climate
the
Change,
domestic
the
public
UNFCCC,
source of
climate change
finance.
refers to the long-term
And you would have
shifts and
seen
alterations
various
in
attempts
weather
at state
patterns
level across
and
Kaduna,
global
Kano, and
temperatures that
Jigawa
can be
at
attributed to human activities
tagging
and or
the
natural
state
variability
budgets
that
to be
significantly
able to
impacts
identify those
ecosystems
expenditure
and poses
that are meant
significant
for
existential
climate-related
challenges to
activities,
our
and
environment.
what your role
The
is
emphasis
as
is
civil
on our
society
environment
organization in holding
because
government
the
to
environment
account
is a
to
public
ensure
good.
that
The
what has
nature
been
is that
budgeted is
emissions
actually
happen far away
implemented.
in German, far away
This
in
presentation
Japan,
will now also take us
and
through
the impact
domestic
is
private
felt
sources of
in
finance
Nigeria
and
across the states in Nigeria.
international
So climate
sources
change
of
affects a
finance,
wide
and then
range
the
of
assessment
sectors,
toolkits.
including public health,
Not to preempt
agriculture,
the
food security,
presentation, but
water
by the time we
resources,
go through, we'll also share
biodiversity,
with
and
you
energy.
the link
It is a
to the
pressing
tool where
global
you
issue
can
that
also
has
read
far-reaching
further on
implications
it. So
for the
just to add
planet
that
and
this
its
is the
inhabitants.
flagship product of the
The
PACE program.
focus, the global focus of climate change is on mitigation of climate change impacts and adaptation to climate change impacts. Mitigation. What is mitigation? Mitigations are mitigation efforts
Okay,
aim to
so
reduce
just
or
give us a
prevent
few
the
minutes
emissions
to
of
handle
greenhouse
the
gases.
technical bits to
This
ensure that
includes
we have the
transitioning
video up and playing.
to renewable
And
energy, solar, wind, or hydro, improving energy efficiency, promoting sustainable transportation, reforestations, and carbon capture technologies.
Yeah.
These
So
actions help to
this is a
slow down
flagship
global
product
warming
of the PACE
and reduce
program.
future
And
climate
just to
risks.
add that
Then adaptation.
PACE as a program,
Adaptation
we are concluding
strategies
our
help
first year of
communities and
implementation this
ecosystems to
March.
cope with the effect of climate
By
change
April,
that are
we'll
already
be
happening or are inevitable.
commencing our year 2 of
This
implementation.
includes
And
building resilient
with
infrastructure,
with
developing
all that is
drought-resistant
happening in
crops,
terms of
or varieties of crops that can
global
withstand adverse weather
allocations to
conditions,
international development
enhancing
and to
disaster
foreign aid, there's a
preparedness,
slight shift
and managing
to what
water
the program will
resources.
be
Adaptation is
focusing on going
essentially
forward.
and
And
especially
one of
critical
that key
for
shifts is to
vulnerable regions
focusing our
facing
attention
rising
more
sea levels,
around
extreme weather,
supporting the
and
states where we
shifting
work,
agricultural zones.
and
The
private
next slide.
businesses are in these locations to also access climate
Now,
finance. This is
climate
why
finance.
engagements like this is
For
important
climate
to us,
finance, that
while
PACE
we
developed the guide to assessing
continue to
climate
provide
finance.
technical assistance to
And
government
looking
actors.
at the resources
We also
available
want to work with
and the
work
extent to
even
which
more with
this
citizens
resource have not been
representatives
assessed.
to be able to hold government to account.
There is no
as
common
to how they're
definition
going
of
about
climate
this
finance.
process. Thank
However,
you.
to PACE, we define climate finance as funds set aside to solve climate problems while creating opportunities. And this, there are three main natures of climate finance. One, I'm the one controlling the slide, Ko. Yes, I'm sharing. So, okay. I'm controlling the slide. Good morning, everyone. My name is Basil Obase, and I am the Public Financial Management Advisor for the PACE program. In this presentation, we'll be looking at the Guide to Assessing Climate Finance developed by PACE. PACE is the Partnership for Agile Governance and Climate Engagement funded by the FCDO. The next slide. In this slide, we'll be looking at understanding climate change. What is climate change? According to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, climate change refers to the long-term shifts and alterations in weather patterns and global temperatures that can be attributed to human activities and or natural variability that significantly impacts ecosystems and poses significant existential challenges to our environment. The emphasis is on our environment because the environment is a public good. The nature is that emissions happen far away in Japan, and the impact is felt in Nigeria, across the states in Nigeria. So climate change affects a wide range of sectors, including public health, agriculture, food security, water resources, biodiversity, and energy. It is a pressing global issue that has far-reaching implications for the planet and its inhabitants. The global focus of climate change is on mitigation of climate change impacts and adaptation to climate change impacts. Mitigation. What is mitigation? Mitigation efforts aim to reduce or prevent the emissions of greenhouse gases. This includes transitioning to renewable energy, solar, wind, or hydro, improving energy efficiency, promoting sustainable transportation, reforestation, and carbon capture technologies. These actions help to slow down global warming and reduce future climate risks. Then adaptation. Adaptation strategies help communities and ecosystems to cope with the effect of climate change that are already happening or are inevitable. This includes building resilient infrastructure, developing drought-resistant crops or varieties of crops that can withstand adverse weather conditions, enhancing disaster preparedness, and managing water resources. Adaptation is essentially and especially critical for vulnerable regions facing rising sea levels, extreme weather, and shifting agricultural zones. The next slide. Now, climate finance. It's for climate finance that PACE developed the guide to assessing climate finance. and looking at the resources available and the extent to which this resource has not been assessed. There is no common definition of climate finance. However, to PACE, we define climate finance as funds set aside to solve climate problems while creating opportunities. And this, essentially, there are three main natures of climate finance. One is that some of them are grants, and these grants are non-repayable funds designed to catalyze climate actions, such as the Nigerian $29 million solar expansion program supporting access to renewable energy. Secondly, we have low-interest loans, concessional capital from development banks like African Development Bank, enable industries to adopt cleaner technologies and climate-smart agriculture with reduced financial risks. One interesting thing about climate finance is that even though some of them are loans, they are concessional in nature, considering the moratorium period and the interest that is attracted to each loan. The next is green bond. The green bond are market instruments that attract private investments for scaling and scalable impact-driven projects, ideal for manufacturing or manufacturers seeking growth capital tied to sustainability outcomes. The next slide. Now, climate financing. It's important to note that climate finance is essentially different from climate financing. Climate financing is the mobilization of funds, the act of mobilizing funds, both domestic and international, public and private, conventional, innovative, to support efforts that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adapt to climate impacts, and build resilience. They include domestic public allocations, or maybe if in Nigeria, for instance, from the FAC allocation or IGR. Private finance from philanthropic individuals, maybe Dangote, Bill and Melinda Gates, and what have you. Then multilateral and bilateral funds. The multilateral funds usually come from a conglomeration of many countries coming together to contribute into a common pool. For instance, the GCF. Then bilateral funds, bilateral agreements between one country and another country. For instance, the UK ICF, the UK International Climate Finance. Then financial instruments where we have things like carbon credits, issuance of green bonds as an innovative instrument to finance climate actions. The next slide. Why does climate finance matter? Like we said, climate finance is needed for both mitigation and adaptation, as well as resilience building. And we should understand that resilience building is a combination of the effect of mitigation and adaptation. When you combine mitigation efforts with adaptation efforts, you end up building resilience. Climate finance is therefore needed for mitigation because large-scale investments are required to significantly reduce emissions. Also, it's equally important for adaptation as significant financial resources are needed to adapt to adverse effects and reduce the impact of a changing climate. The context. We have to understand the context for the development of the climate finance or climate financing. What we look at critically is at the subnational level, the state governments, and within these state governments, the private sector that contributes to climate action. So state governments and eco-friendly businesses within the states are directly responsible for sectors critical to climate mitigation and adaptation, such as agriculture, water resources, waste management, energy access, and local infrastructure. Importantly, over 70% of the NDC, the nationally determined contribution interventions, including renewable energy deployment, climate smart agriculture, and resilient infrastructure, require state-led implementation. In fact, climate change impact is felt at the local level by the people. So, from the local government level to the state government level. In essence, every part of Nigeria is a state government or a local government. The next slide. So, the guide to assessing climate finance. PACE developed the guide to assessing climate finance, which serves as a toolkit for understanding and assessing readiness to assess climate finance. Pardon that tautology. By the assessing readiness, we mean conducting diagnostics to ascertain the level to which state governments or eco-friendly businesses are ready to assess climate finance. And then assessing climate finance, access to climate finance is actually receiving financial assistance, receiving funds, and directing funds towards climate action. There are two types of assessments that we developed, an assessment checklist that was developed by and included in the guide. Number one is the assessment for government, and the other is for eco-friendly businesses or private sector who are dealing in climate-related businesses. So assessments are usually conducted for either government or eco-friendly businesses. The assessment guide or checklist has a total of 6 thematic pillars with 58 indicators. The pillars include, number one, institutional and governance readiness. Number two, legal and policy alignment, especially alignment with the Paris Agreement and the NDCs. Number three, public financial management systems. Number four, framework for identifying and developing bankable and near-bankable projects. 5, human resource and capacity or technical capacity development. And then finally, number 6 is stakeholder engagement and coordination mechanisms. The GACF, which is the acronym for the Guide for Assessing Climate Finance, was developed and in terms of its design was to identify available sources of climate finance, both domestic and international. It also maps funds that government and eco-friendly private sector businesses can access, and further outlines the specific requirements and eligibility conditions for accessing these different sources of funds. Then it provides a checklist for government and eco-friendly private sector businesses or actors to assess their readiness for assessing climate finance. And then it develops a toolkit for diagnosing key bottlenecks and leading reform actions that will help close identified gaps. The next slide, we are looking at the priority climate finance sources. So the guide developed by PACE has 2 main important documents. The guide, the main guide or the main document, and the detailed guide. In the detailed guide, we provided structured and user-friendly information designed to help state government and eco-friendly businesses navigate climate finance ecosystem with greater clarity and confidence. It builds on the foundations laid in the main guide and provides a detailed guide on comprehensive information on 18 priority climate finance sources identified as holding the greatest potentials for fund mobilizations to accelerate Nigerian state-level climate action. So these 18 sources were put into a funnel and looked at as the ones that are probably low-hanging fruits. The 18 Priority climate finance sources include and are organized in the following ways. Number one is the public sector fund from recurrent revenue. For instance, the federation accounts and internally generated revenue by the state government. The second category are six from domestic private financing facilities, mostly commercial banks. These include number one from Access Bank PLC, which has its root from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, the JICA. Stanbic IBTC FinDev Canada, which is from Canada, and InfraCredit Climate Facility, First City Monument Bank for renewable energy, Fidelity Green Finance Program, and Sterling One Foundation. Those are the six from domestic private sources. Then we have 11 from multilateral and bilateral sources. And from multilateral sources, we have three, the Global Environmental Facility, GEF, the Green Climate Fund, GCF, African Climate Change Fund, which are the three from multilateral. The six from bilateral include the United Kingdom International Climate Finance or Climate Fund, UK ICF, the French Development Agency Global Environmental Facility, FDGCF, the Danish Climate Investment Fund, the Canadian African Development Climate Fund, which is almost like bilateral in nature between the Canadian agency and African Development Bank. The Nigeria German Corporation Global Energy Transition, and the Norwegian Support for Global Framework for Climate Service. The next slide. There are two from specific climate financing instruments. Number one is the green bond, issuance of green bond, which is considered as a critical source of climate finance. And then the African Carbon Market Initiatives. A lot of progress have been made recently on activation of Nigerian carbon market access. The guidance on these 18 priority climate finance sources cover, number one, eligibility criterion, application steps and requirements, reporting obligations during the implementation of projects funded through the financing instruments, amongst others. We may look at this in detail in subsequent slides. The next slide, please. Multilateral climate finance. Assessing multilateral climate finance involves a structured and often rigorous process designed to ensure that financed projects align with the global climate goals and national priorities. These national priorities are contained in the, for instance, the NDCs and the National Adaptation Plan, the NAPS. So countries must engage with the designated institutional frameworks, such as the NDA, the Nationally Designated Authority. In the case of GCF, this is the NCCC, or focal points, which serve as gateway to these funds. These entities are responsible for endorsing project proposals and ensuring they reflect national climate priorities and strategies. Projects are typically submitted by the accredited entities, AEs for short, which may include national ministries, development banks, international organizations such as the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, the World Bank, after undergoing internal appraisal and stakeholder consultation. Now let us briefly look at the GCF, the the Green Climate Fund, GCF. The fund was established in 2010, even though it became operational since 2015. The funding sources are from developed countries' contributions, private sectors, and foundations. Available fund as at the time of the development of this guide was about 20 billion US dollar in pledges. And disbursement till date is that as at the time we developed the guide, about 13.5 billion had been released, and there were 200 projects in 120 countries with co-financing amounting to about 51.9 billion. This co-financing is that for each project, there will be contributions from GCF, while the recipient country or state would be contributing a quota in the form of a counterpart funding, for instance. Eligibility. The fund could be accessed by developing countries, their parties that are parties to the UNFCCC Convention, subnational entities via their designated authority who have a no objection letter. The mandate of the fund is a balance between mitigation and adaptation. So the fund, the total resources available for the fund is normally divided into two. So 50% goes to mitigation, while 50% goes to adaptation, with focus on least developed countries, small island developing countries, and African states who need the fund. The key sectors of focus for GCF include the energy and transport, building and cities, forest and agriculture, water and health, and climate resilient infrastructure. Let us briefly look at the step-by-step guide to accessing the GCF. So in terms of our understanding, the GCF provides a wide range of financial instruments such as grants, concessional loans, guarantees, and equity investments to support climate mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. The Development Bank of Nigeria accreditation as a financial intermediary and implementing partner under the Global Climate or Resilient Fund is a significant progress in the GCF access. The GCF substantially improves subnational access to and access prospects. This is primarily due to the DBN established network of participating financial institutions, the PFIs, including commercial banks, microbanks, microfinance banks, and non-bank financial institutions that operate extensively at the state and local levels. For Nigeria and Nigerian states, effective access and utilization of these resources require, number one, early engagement with the nationally designated authority, integration of projects into national climate strategies, as well as targeted use of GCF readiness program to build foundational capacity before submitting full proposals. So the step-by-step guide, I will follow this step-by-step guide according to the key stages. There are requirements or eligibility conditions, and you have the step-by-step guide, what you need to do as a state government, and what you need to measure as progress. So number one is alignment with national climate frameworks. So the projects to be considered by the state, for it to be bankable, those projects must align with the Nigerian National Determined Contributions, NDC 3.0, and the National Adaptation Plans, and as well as the National Climate Strategies, for instance, the climate change policy of the country. So states should ensure that they have their own climate change policy, and those policies or plans align with the national climate goals. They should then work towards securing endorsement from the National Designated Authority, NDA. In the case of GCF, this is the National Council on Climate Change, and for GEF is the Federal Ministry of Environment. So the readiness measure under here is that you have received an endorsement letter from the NDA, and also the project concept note that you are developing reflects the NDC or NAPS targets. Number two, engagement with accredited entities. Subnationals or state government must partner with GCF accredited entities such as the Bank of Industry, the African Development Bank, or the UNDP. So the step is that you identify and formalize collaboration with GCF accredited entities and sign a memorandum of understanding or a cooperation agreement for project development. What we measure your progress is that number one, you have engaged the AEs, that is the accredited entities, and your agreement documents are presentable. The next slide. Number three, nationally designated authority clearance. So the NDA must provide a no objection letter for project submission. The steps is that you first have to submit a concept note or project idea note, the PIN, to the NDA. And the NDA, after their review, will send back to you, and you have to address any feedback and then ensure that you secure a no objection letter. So readiness measure include that no objection letter have been obtained and concept note reviewed by the NDA. Then number four is that project concept development and submission. Projects must be well developed and structured per GCF investment criteria. You have to develop a climate rationale and theory of change, and prepare and submit concept notes and full proposal with the accredited entity. So the measure of progress here is that concept notes have been endorsed and proposal quality meets GCF criteria. 5, environmental and social safeguards. You have to ensure that your proposal is in compliance with GCF environmental and social safeguard policies as is required. So you have to also conduct environmental and social impact assessments and other required assessments, and then integrate gender and stakeholder engagement plan into what you're doing. The readiness measure now here is that you have been able to conduct environmental and social map or equivalent that is in place, and you have also gender action plan that you have developed. Number 6 is a demonstration of climate impact and paradigm shift. The project must show mitigation and adaptation impact and long-term benefits or co-benefits. So the step is that you have to define greenhouse gases reduction targets or resilient outcome that the project is going to be contributing to. Then align project goals with the GCF result framework. So the measure of progress is climate impact quantified. This is where the MRV becomes very, very important in terms of mitigation and adaptation, impact calculation and validation. Then indicators matches the GCF results areas. Number 7, co-financing and resource mobilization. So projects that mobilize additional finance from public or private and are co-financed stand better chances of being implemented or securing funding from GCF. The step here is that you have to identify state or partner budgets, contributions, and document funding sources in the financial plan. The measures of progress here are co-financing commitments secured and contribution letters included in the package of what you're submitting to GCF. Number 8 is institutional and fiduciary capacity. This fiduciary capacity has to do with the existence of internal processes to ensure or reduce illicit financial flows. So implementing institutions must meet basic financial procurement and audit standards that ensures that illicit financial flows does not happen or reduce corruption. So what you need to do is to conduct a PFM self-assessment and then improve internal control and audit frameworks. So one of the things you have to show as progress is timely audit reports and internal financial controls that are active. Number 9, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. The project must include MAN-E systems, including MRV, that is measurement, reporting, and verification systems for tracking performance. So you have to develop result-based M&E plans, define indicators, baselines, and reporting structures. The readiness measure here include M&E framework that aligns with GCF templates and a functional MRV system. Number 10, you have stakeholder and community engagement. Because of the nature of climate change, which is multi-dynamic, multi-sectoral, and broad in terms of its impact, there is need to be a broad stakeholder consultation to ensure the inclusivity of approaches and the project design. So the step-by-step guide include conduct inclusive consultation with CSOs, women, youth, and the private sector, and reflect their input in the design of the project. So measures of readiness include stakeholder reports and sign-in sheets and community support letters documented. Finally, you have readiness support access. GCF readiness support access offers funding for capacity building and pipeline development, right? And the link below could take you to resources about the GCF. One thing about the GACF is that across the document, there are links to various resources that users of the guide could benefit from, and also facilitate their engagement and application for any fund. The step-by-step guide under this is that you apply for readiness grants through the NDA or AEs and use funds for technical training, planning, and proposal preparation. Readiness measure here, progress indicators here include readiness funding assessed and outputs, planned training delivered. So that is for GCF. Now we have to look at the overview of the checklist. So apart from having step-by-step guide for each of the fund, we now use those requirements, those eligibility criterions and requirements to develop a generic, somehow generic checklist that cut across 6 thematic pillars that I had mentioned before. So the checklist, the readiness assessment checklist for public sector, is a structured diagnostic tool developed to support state governments in evaluating their institutional, legal, financial, and technical preparedness to assess and effectively manage climate finance. That is also the same thing for the private sector readiness assessment checklist. It's still a diagnostic tool and is used to evaluate institutional, legal, financial, and technical preparedness of the firm to assess climate finance. It is designed to complement the guide to assessing climate finance. The checklist provides a systematic, transparent, and easy-to-use assessment framework, enabling states to benchmark their current capacity against established standards and identify critical gaps requiring reform. Sorry about that. In this slide, we are looking at the structure of the public sector checklist. The checklist is organized into 6 thematic pillars with a total of 58 indicators. Each pillar reflects core elements of climate finance readiness. The pillars, number 1 is institutional and governance readiness, legal and policy alignment. Number 2, 3, public financial management systems. 4, framework for identifying and developing bankable and non-bankable projects. Number 5, human resource and technical capacity. And number 6 is stakeholder engagement and coordination mechanisms. Let us now look at the pillars one by one. The pillar 1 on institutional and governance readiness. This pillar assesses whether the state has designated institutional arrangements such as a functional climate change department, interministerial coordination bodies, and climate finance desk to lead and coordinate climate action and financing efforts. Beyond the presence of institutions, the assessment also probes their effectiveness, stability, and capacity to lead climate finance efforts. It also looks at whether the state has appointed high-level political champions or focal points for climate finance. The Pillar 1 on institutional and governance readiness has 14 indicators. We will not be reviewing those 14 indicators in this presentation. Pillar 2, legal and policy alignment. This pillar examines whether the state has enacted relevant laws and policy instruments. For instance, a climate change law, climate change policy, state development plan, green growth strategies that align with climate change, the national climate change policy, the Paris agreements, and donor requirements. The checklist evaluates not only the existence of policies, but also their level of implementation, enforceability, and consistency with donors' requirements. Pillar 2 on legal and policy alignment has a total of 5 indicators. Pillar 3, public financial management systems. This pillar evaluates the credibility, transparency, and performance of budgetary processes, public investment management, audit mechanism, and states' ability to track climate-related expenditures through climate budget tracking and functional classification. It also assesses the extent to which outputs and outcomes are identified in the planning and budget process and monitored during project implementation. Pillar 3 on public financial management has a total of 18 indicators. In fact, this has the highest number of indicators, even though maybe not the most important indicators. Pillar 4, framework for identifying and developing bankable or near-bankable projects. This pillar assesses the state government's ability to identify, design, and present bankable or near-bankable climate projects and to monitor their implementation. This is crucial for assessing climate finance, ensuring that priorities are translated into high-quality investment-ready proposals that are attractive to the various climate finance facilities or providers. Pillar 4 on the framework for identifying and developing bankable and near-bankable projects has a total of 6 indicators. Pillar 5. The Pillar 5 is on human resource and technical capacity. Assessing this pillar assesses the availability and adequacy of technical expertise, trained staff, institutional capacity to develop climate finance proposals, manage projects, conduct monitoring and evaluations, and engage with development partners. It looks at whether the ministry, department, and agencies have adequate trained staff capable of preparing high-quality project proposals that meet donor technical standards, as well as expertise in project management, procurement, and financial reporting. This pillar on human resource and technical capacity has a total of 6 indicators. Pillar 5, 6 indicators. Now to Pillar 6, the final pillar. Pillar 6 is on stakeholder engagement and coordination mechanism. This pillar reviews the inclusiveness and effectiveness of stakeholder platforms for engaging both civil society, academia, private sector actors, vulnerable groups, and traditional institutions in climate policy and finance decision-making processes. It assesses the ability of the state to identify, categorize, and engage during the key project stages from design, assessing the fund, implementation, and monitoring. The Pillar 6 on stakeholder engagement and coordination mechanism has a total of 9 indicators. Summary of assessment process. So when we want to use the checklist to conduct assessment, we make explanation as to the fact that each criterion or indicator within the 6 pillars is evaluated using a binary yes or no. It's either a yes that this situation exists in your state, or is a no that it doesn't exist in your state. That is the validation approach, and this is to ensure clarity and objectivity in the assessment, and to help know exactly where it is pitching the state and how to support the state as required. So states are expected to provide documentary evidence or verifiable sources to substantiate affirmative responses. So in situations where the state has said or responded yes to a particular indicator, it has to be validated. The assessment process will also identify any action plan that may be needed to be taken by the state government to address weaknesses or gaps, including responsibilities and timeline. Thank you. This is the end of the presentation. We are available for any questions, contributions, or suggestions. Thank you. I'm the one controlling the slide, Paul. Yes, I'm sharing. So,
Okay.
I'm controlling the slide.
So thank you to our representative. Okay. Thank you to our representatives from PACE. Next, we would be having the plenary session. So we would be accepting any contribution all through the course of the presentations that we've been having today. So please, if you have any contribution or question that you'd like to state, please signify so we can go around. Any contribution? Okay, we have someone over there. Okay.
Thank you very much to all the presenters. And I believe you'll be here with us. We are fasting, so people are trying to manage the energy level. I think from the beginning of the sessions to this moment, it has been a great learning. And while we are taking the first and second sessions on fiscal sustainability and then the strengthening PFM, something stood out for me. We are able to have identified those key fiscal sustainability areas and responsibilities for us as humans and as members within development sector and civil society. And one thing that I feel we might try to consider is segmenting our engagements into 2 key components, especially around fiscal sustainability. The first one, those engagements that we need to do before the budgeting and budget implementation. And that is to ensure there is that budget tagging around climate actions, which we now do not have it, and to ensure that the real issues are what are being addressed, even in the budgeting. For example, if we look at the northern Nigeria, we do not have a similar situation like the one we are having in Niger Delta region. There it is more of methane emission, which is really a big issue in that area. While here, we might be having an issues around deforestation, using carbons and all of that. So prior to the budgeting and all of that, it is important if we are able to focus on these kind of engagements. And then, of course, during the budget process and afterwards, that is to ensure that even the little amount which we believe is insignificant and insufficient that are being budgeted for climate actions, we know it is not sufficient, but even at that, we should ensure a minimum of 30 to 40% implementation of that budget, which we know it hardly happens. So I think these are some of the engagements that we can do, post-budgeting, and ensure that the government did their own part. Then the aspect of sustainability, I mean, that is massive. I mean, the climate issues, the climate change, it's here, and we caused it as human beings. And our activities continues to cause more issues. That is why we are happy we are having both adaptation and mitigation, because there are things we cannot stop doing as humans. But I think it is important if we begin to shift in terms of our advocacy, advocate to our government not to borrow money for climate action. Because if you borrow money, the requirement, the action that needs to happen, there will still be a need next year, next 2 years, next 3 years. So that means we'll be compiling debts over debts over debts. But if we are able to find a way that we put it as a tagged, activity in our budgeting, that would mean the little amount of resources that we have within our country, we are going to assign some resources for climate action. So I think if we want to sustain this kind of efforts, it must not be based on debts or even a funds. It has to be part of the activities that we budget for, it, just like education, like health, like water, like security, and everything in our country. That would help. And then, of course, the last part, there is one of the presenters that mentioned something very incredible, that if you are to make an investment for climate mitigation or adaptation, do it in such a way that it can one day bring revenue, so that you can take more actions using those revenues, or at least that action can be sustained by the resources generated from the investment you do on that. I think this is a great presentations and sessions. I learned a lot, and thank you very much for this effort. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, my name is Adamu Suleiman from Jigawa. I think I have only 2 or 3 questions, maybe some of that suggestion for that. Mr. Masour say some, and then I think I have one question. I think the second presenter talk about weak tracking and in ecological fund about 1-point-something trillion naira. So I don't know, but all this kind of issue regards to the fund of ecological funds, but we have some budget. You have to get this budget specification, because without tracking, we say weak tracking, right? So without specification, you cannot track anything regards to any ecological fund or something come from the SGF office or whatever. You understand? And then secondly, first and second presenter talk about mitigation and adaptation. But I may suggest that in mitigation, we have to always advocating for early warning system. It's very, very important. Early warning system. Because let me take a scenario from Jigawa State, where I came from. Because there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of communities where they are being affected by floods. But some communities, they come to ask questions, how are we going to mitigate so things? So I think if as a civil society, we come together advocating for such policy or such ideas, I think government can adopt it so that I think we can go together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for very wonderful presentations. I have some few observation, remarks, and questions to ask. Number one, issue around transparency and accountability. When you are bringing out the issues, there are some critical issues that you are very silent about it. I don't know why. Number one is access to information is very critical if you wanted to track whatever budget or funds. And getting that information is very critical and it's very difficult to get despite all the portals, apps and what have you by federal government to make budget information accessible and available. So how do you expect us to track and monitor such kind of funds, even at national and subnational level? Because there is nothing like national. That's national at the center, but where the activities happen, it happen at the subnational. So how are we going to track without access to relevant information and data? So I think you need to shed more light around that. Number two, I'm looking at the figures. Sometimes you quoted a year, some there is no reference to the year you put. I know in Jigawa, I've been following up the budget for almost 2 decades. I know the climate budget was tagged, but you didn't recognize that the 2025-2026 budget was tagged, was tagged. So you can search, you have to go back to your books and verify such information. Then another one, I have seen the last presenter around GCF. I know GCF is not accessible by civil society organization. It is meant by national and subnational. So I expect to see presentation that will provide some information for civil society organization that they can access some climate financing to implement some pilot projects in their respective states for state government to replicate. But the last presentation, I think, he has done very well. But that, I think, is meant for the state actors, not for non-state actors. Because I was privileged to attend one training with the state government, Ministry of Environment around GCF, and we have developed some concept notes. So I expect to see, because the gathering, the audience, they are all civil society organizations. So I expect to see presentation tailored around climate financing that can be accessed by civil society and other non-state actors. Finally, I think it's very timely because whether we like it or not, climate change is a very serious business of the day. And the last, not the least, it's not about making the allocation. It's not about making the allocation. It's about the releases and utilization. And I find it difficult now to navigate because UNESCO, they were advocating for 23%, education sector, Abuja Declaration, 13%, health sector, this for agriculture, what's the name of this, Malabo was talking about. So before you know it, the whole percentage will go. So everybody was saying X percentage to particular sector or section. I think we need to also look at this critically because it's not feasible because of the competing priorities. There's other priorities in the sector, but let us see that the amount set aside has been utilized for the purposes it's meant for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me add, in addition, with regard to budget tracking, particularly at the national level, I think it is not up to now. We don't know anywhere or any platform that you lodge your complaint and resolved by the state actors, particularly at federal level. But at the state level, we don't have issue with regard to budget. Yeah, there is no feedback. When you lodge your complaint, you never see any response. Before, we used to lodge our complaint as it a federal budget website. But now the site is not functioning. Nokopo is not functioning. What is the other one?
They know that very well.
So.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Almost all the presentations were on track. Only that what caught my attention was the issue of, I think, one of the presenter, where I saw an area where it's talking about the issue of borrowing. And it was emphasized on the borrowing that how can civil society advocate to see that in the course of what we are doing, this borrowing should not continue as it's been showcased. To me, it's very difficult to do that because looking at the Nigerian context, if I'm not saying contrary to what I knew, as at last month, I know Nigerian debt stood at 181 trillion. So if you compare and contrast with what we are getting, look at what is happening in Iran or between Iran, United States and Israel. That has even caused another problem to Nigeria, but it's helping our saving. If your benchmark is maybe stood at 75 in the 2026 budget, for example, now what is the current price? If you look at the current price, because of this incidents, stood at $180 per barrel. So look at the excess. So with all these excesses, even before now, why are we borrowing? This is the question that we keep on repeating. Why are we borrowing? So if you look at the Nigerian context at large, you cannot differentiate from what is being, going to be practiced on climate action. So it's something that maybe at a larger level, we see how we can sit down, you as partners, we as civil society, to see how we can come up with a plan, to see how we can, engage government at a different level, to see how they can, improve on such. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Even though part of my question has been raised by almost most of the respondents, is tailored towards issue of the budget tagging. I know at state level, CSOs has been making a very wonderful job to ensure state budget have climate tagging. Kano also follow the suit like Jigawa mentioned. So at federal level, that's where the challenge is. Even though states were expected to copy from the federal, but this time around is the reverse. So I don't know what budget is doing towards ensuring federal budget is well tagged, being at the federal center, is well tagged with the climate allocations, which it's going to be more easy for tracking, implementation, tracking, because without that tagging, that's where misappropriation of resources is all about. And also to ride on the question of my brother from Jigawa, I am opportune to be part of the tracker team for Kano State, and I believe budget has a platform that brings about the government and citizens, which is the tracker app. You will be able to lodge your complaint, share experiences, track budget and upload, and the government actors will be able to see and respond, and budget can follow up with that. And also those within the app can also support and amplify those voices. So I think this is the key things for us to have the federal budget well tagged, so that at state level we can also see what is coming to the state from those allocations. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. My one is an observations and followed by a questions. In the first presentation, I have seen a heading trying to mention about the sensitive MDS, and a kind of list of the MDS has been mentioned. And but the question here, is it an exhausted list of the MDS, or there are rooms for other MDS to be there? For instance, I haven't seen other MDS, like I have seen Niger Delta Development Commission. We have other sectors like the Northwest Development Commission, Northeast. We have other sectors like the livestock development. And if you look at it, they are also part of the sensitive MDS that need to feature there. Then secondly, in the second presentation, I have seen issues regarding to influence math. But I think the correction should be like a kind of influence mapping, in the sense of you are mentioning the stakeholders, trying to showcase all the possible stakeholders within that particular segment. Third, regarding to the code, the federal code, yeah, we have seen one of the presenter made mention about the federal code 2304. And with that, yeah, all the climate-related budget can easily be tracked. And part of my submission here, the coalitions or the state, the subnational, then we should adopt how to push this kind of code to be reflected at subnational level, so that, because if you look at the climate, it's cross-cutting across many other sectors. And if it is being targeted with the actual code at the state level, just like other contributors, it will be easily being tracked. Then lastly, on the toolkit, yeah, we have seen sectors right from the domestic public, the private sector, multinational, bilateral. And we have seen the detailed stage that you are going to adopt, especially the global climate fund and how you will be able to assess. But others, apart of GCF, the AFD, is there any other detailed procedures like the AFD and the rest, more especially how the actors at the grassroots level or at state level can easily have access with this kind of climate finances? Thank you very much.
Do we have any other contribution? Okay.
Wonderful presentations. I think there was a lot of questions in the first presentations, and well, the second presentation, for some of us that paid attention, I know some of us were just napping. There was a lot of answers again. I believe Nigeria contributes very minimal to the global climate crisis. Researches show that we contribute only 0.3 to 0.12%, I think, which means, you know, European countries, the US, China, Russia, and all contribute more. But then we end up paying for the consequences of things we don't necessarily do. So why shouldn't those countries that contribute more to the effects of climate change pay for the prices? I think this might be one of the ways for the pollutants to pay for the crisis they, you know, include in the African countries. Again, you know, we talk about debts all the time. I recently made a research, and I identified that almost from 2022 to date, Nigeria alone, in climate change alone, there is over 100 billion naira of debt from, you know, African development banks, from the World Bank and all. But when it comes to the action, silence speaks louder than the actual action. If you go to the local communities who actually gets the effect of the climate change. The effects are still there, but then when we talk about the action, it is very minimal. So I think decentralizing the effort of mitigating the climate action to the local levels, keeping them as the custodians of the effects would also make a great contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other contribution? Okay, Alice.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, for your submission. So I just wanted to respond to the last question on the GCF. Yes, it is both a national and it is a fund accessible by both the national and subnational. So I just wanted to buttress that this is more of a training of trainers session. We as CSOs engage both with the government and the citizens. And more so, we are also more like technical partners to the government. So it's also critical for us to use this tool to, as key advocacy points to engage with the government because they may not know these things. So it's more of a trainer session. So that's why it was mentioned during the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to speak to what she said about what budget is doing concerning the climate tagging. Well, we're doing our best to advocate, but I just want to put it out there that we shouldn't leave things like this just to budget foundation rather. We are all CSOs. We can work collectively to advocate for things like this. If you come across something and you feel like budget hasn't put it out there yet, you can put it out there too and advocate for something like that. Just put it out there. And then somebody spoke about stakeholders that were listed, that we omitted some. Of course, there's room to add more, but we can't add everything because it will be too long. So because it's not stated there doesn't mean it's not part of the stakeholders. They're all critical stakeholders for us. And thank you so much, Ma, for talking about tracker. I was waiting for all the questions to be asked first before I speak to that, but they're not even in the room, the people that spoke about it. But yes, if you have any complaints and you want to take it to the government, you can go through budgets. That's our platform, yourtracker.org. It used to be tracker.ng, but it was changed recently. So you can submit your complaints there, but we just advise that you have proof, that's data, back it up with data. If you are reporting something, show us proof of where you feel like, okay, this thing is lagging, or what this thing is supposed to be here, but it isn't. So this is where I want you to help. These are the questions that I want you to help me ask. But even as a citizen, we have the right to demand accountability. We have the right to ask these questions. But most times, people don't know how to go about it. So budget is more than happy to help us lay our complaints to the government and to get feedback on our behalf. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. We are trying to put all the contributions together so we can have the repertoire report. So please just give us about 2 to 5 minutes to put everyone's thoughts together. Then we'll read through everyone's contributions. Thank you very much. Okay, yes, that's fine. Thank you, sir. So for everyone online, we are taking a quick break. Our participants here will be going to pray shortly while we prepare the repertoire report. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes, 5 to 10, just to give our participants time to pray. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. So I would be taking us through the key observations and the key recommendations from our contributions from this meeting today. So the first point we made was the need for strategic engagement by civil society. Participants emphasized the importance of segmenting civil society engagement to ensure more targeted and effective advocacy, particularly around climate action and public finance. 2, debt sustainability concerns in climate financing. Participants highlighted the tension between advancing climate financing and Nigeria's existing debt burden. It was noted that increasing public expenditure on climate actions through borrowing may further strain fiscal sustainability, raising concerns about the feasibility of expanding climate investment without exacerbating the country's debt profile. Third, gaps in climate budget tagging. While some progress have been made, climate-related expenditures are not consistently or clearly tagged across budgets. This limits transparency, tracking, and accountability in climate finance. Fourth, weak link between allocation and implementation. Climate budgeting is often focused on allocation without equal attention to implementation. Funds earmarked for climate action are not always utilized for intended purposes. The fifth point, limited access to information. Access to budget and climate-related information remains a challenge, undermining accountability and citizens' participation. Sixth, inadequate platforms for citizens' feedback. There are insufficient accessible platforms for citizens to lodge complaints or provide feedback on government climate actions and spending. The seventh point, dependence on borrowing for climate finance. There is growing concerns about reliance on borrowing to fund climate initiatives, raising sustainability questions. And finally, the global inequality in climate responsibility. Nigeria contributes relatively less to global climate change, but faces significant impact. At the same time, countries contributing more to global emissions have greater capability and responsibility to act. So I'll be going to the key recommendations made by everyone during the course of the conversation. First, we should strengthen climate budget tagging. Government should institutionalize clear and standardized climate budget tagging systems at federal and subnational levels to improve tracking and transparency. 2, ensure minimum allocation to climate action. A defined minimum percentage of the budget, e.g. 20 to 30%, should be considered for climate-related interventions, particularly in vulnerable sectors. 3, prioritize implementation and value for money. Beyond allocation, mechanisms should be established to ensure that climate funds are effectively implemented and deliver measurable outcomes over time. Fourth, we should promote investment-oriented climate spending. Climate mitigation and adaptation investment should be structured to yield long-term social, economic, and environmental returns. Fifth, it should enhance transparency and access to information. Government should provide and improve public access to budget data and climate finance information to enable effective monitoring by citizens and civil society. Sixth point is we should establish accessible feedback mechanisms. User-friendly platforms should be developed for citizens to report issues, track projects, and engage with government on climate-related spending. The seventh point, we should advocate for sustainable climate financing. Stakeholders should advocate for reduced dependence on borrowing and explore innovative and sustainable financing options for climate action. The eighth point is we should strengthen early warning and preparedness system. So we should invest in early warning systems for climate mitigation, and adaptation should be prioritized with active involvement from civil society. And our final point on the key recommendation is to foster collective civil society action. Civil society organizations should collaborate more intentionally to drive coordinated advocacy on climate finance, accountability, and policy reforms. So in conclusion, the engagement has discussed a lot on the key observations and the recommendations. So I'll be calling on my colleague, Glory, to give us the closing remark for the day.
Good afternoon, everyone, once again. My name is Aituhoi Glory. I want to sincerely say thank you to Budget, the PACE team, and all our stakeholders for being here today and for your active participation. We have had very insightful discussions, and it is very clear that strengthening climate action through open and transparent budgeting requires all of us working together. We look forward to continuing this collaboration and turning this conversation into real impacts. Thank you once again, and have a safe journey back to your various destinations. And please, if you know that you have not signed the attendance form and the local transportation, please do well to do so. And let's all come together for our group photograph. Thank you.
Thank you everyone once again for joining, and thank you to all our online participants. Thank you for staying till this time. We do appreciate you. Do have a great day, everyone. Bye for now. And